I stand at my college graduation ceremony watching my parents beam with pride in the audience. They have no idea I know about the $51,000, the money my grandmother left specifically for my education, which they secretly transferred to fund my brother Jake's extravagant wedding 6 months ago. While they told me college is a waste and refused to help, they threw a $20,000 reception and honeymoon for the child who matters. Today, everything changes. Today, they learn what their favoritism really cost them. 3 months ago, my world shattered in the most unexpected way. I was house-sitting for my parents while they vacationed in Florida during Jake's honeymoon cruise. What started as a simple favor turned into the most devastating discovery of my 22 years. I remember walking through their spotless suburban home in Cincinnati, watering my mother's prized orchids and collecting mail. The routine felt comforting until I noticed scattered papers on my father's desk in the home office. Robert had always been meticulous about organization, so the messy pile seemed unusual. Initially, I intended to straighten the documents without looking, but a bank letterhead caught my attention. The header read Eleanor Martinez Educational Trust Fund, with my name clearly printed below. My heart raced as I recognized my late grandmother's name. She had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving me what my parents described as a small educational fund that was somehow tied up in legal complications. The bank statement told a completely different story. $51,437 had been transferred out of the account in a single transaction dated exactly 1 month before Jake's wedding. The receiving account belonged to Platinum Events and Catering Services. My hands trembled as I searched through more documents. Credit card receipts revealed the shocking truth about Jake's wedding expenses. $15,000 for the Riverside venue rental, $8,000 for gourmet catering with prime rib and lobster tail, $12,000 for their Mediterranean cruise honeymoon, $7,000 for the open bar serving premium liquors, $4,000 for professional photography and videography, $3,000 for the elaborate floral arrangements my mother had bragged about to neighbors. The receipts painted a picture of luxury I could never have imagined my parents affording on my father's insurance adjuster salary and my mother's part-time retail income. Yet here was proof they had funded Jake's dream wedding, using money specifically designated for my education. I discovered a folder labeled Eleanor's Will, containing my grandmother's final testament. Her handwriting appeared on attached notes expressing specific wishes that her granddaughter pursue higher education without financial burden. She had saved this money working double shifts as a hospital cafeteria supervisor for 30 years, determined to give me opportunities she never had. The cruelest detail emerged from a handwritten letter my mother had drafted to Jake's fiancée, Ashley. Linda described how excited she was to give her son the wedding he deserves, and how proud she felt supporting the child who will actually make something of himself. She wrote about my psychology degree as Angelita's expensive hobby that won't lead anywhere meaningful. I spent that entire evening reading through documents each page, confirming that my parents had systematically lied to me for months. While I worked 3 jobs to afford tuition at the University of Cincinnati, sleeping 4 hours nightly and surviving on ramen noodles, they were planning my brother's lavish celebration using my inheritance. The most heartbreaking discovery was a receipt for wedding favors costing $800. My parents had spent more on decorative trinkets for party guests than I earned in 2 weeks at my campus bookstore job. They chose to fund chocolate boxes wrapped in silk ribbons rather than support their daughter's education. That night, I sat in their immaculate living room surrounded by family photos showcasing Jake's achievements, while mine remained relegated to a single small frame tucked behind my mother's decorative candles. The evidence sprawled across their coffee table like pieces of a puzzle, finally revealing its devastating picture. I realized my parents had been planning this betrayal for over a year, carefully coordinating the timing to ensure the money was available for Jake's wedding expenses. They had watched me struggle, financially accepted my exhausted complaints about working multiple jobs, and never once mentioned the substantial fund sitting untouched in my name. The following Sunday dinner at my parents' house felt like walking into a trap I had set for myself. I arrived with copies of every document hidden in my purse, my heart pounding as I watched my mother, Linda, set the table with her best china, the same pattern she had registered for Jake's wedding gifts. The conversation started normally. My father, Robert, discussed his latest insurance cases, while Linda complained about her co-workers' incompetence at the department store. Jake and Ashley shared honeymoon photos from their Mediterranean cruise, describing five-star restaurants and luxury hotels I could never afford. The sunset from our suite balcony was absolutely breathtaking. Ashley gushed, showing pictures of their ocean view accommodations. Your parents really went overboard making sure we had the perfect trip. I watched my parents exchange satisfied glances, basking in praise for their generosity. Linda reached over to pat Jake's hand affectionately while completely ignoring my presence at the opposite end of the table. "We wanted you to start your marriage with beautiful memories," Linda said warmly. "No expense was too great for our son's happiness." The irony burned in my chest. I cleared my throat and placed the first bank statement on the table beside my untouched meatloaf. Speaking of expenses, I found something interesting while house-sitting last week. Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth. His eyes focused on the document, and I watched color drain from his face as he recognized the letterhead. "Angelita, what exactly are you doing with private financial documents?" Linda's voice carried a sharp edge of defensiveness. Learning the truth about my grandmother's educational fund, I replied, calmly spreading additional receipts across the table. "The $51,000 you told me was tied up in legal complications." Jake looked confused, glancing between the papers and our parents' increasingly tense expressions. Ashley leaned forward, her curiosity piqued by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "I don't understand what you think you've discovered." Robert began his insurance adjuster training, kicking in as he attempted damage control. "Those documents are complex financial matters that require proper interpretation." "Really?" I pulled out the transfer receipt. "Because this seems pretty straightforward. $51,437 transferred from the Eleanor Martinez Educational Trust Fund directly to Platinum Events and Catering Services on March 15th, 1 month before Jake's wedding." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Ashley's eyes widened as she processed the implication. Jake set down his water glass with a sharp clink against the table. "That's impossible," Jake said quietly. "Mom and Dad told me the wedding money came from their savings account." Linda's defensive mask cracked, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. She straightened in her chair, abandoning any pretense of denial. "Fine. Yes, we used the money for Jake's wedding, and I'm not apologizing for it." Her blunt admission shocked everyone, including Robert, who shot her a warning look that she completely ignored. "Jake is the one carrying on the family name." Linda continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "He's the one who will give us grandchildren and maintain family traditions. He needed a proper start to his marriage, not some wasteful college fund for a daughter who wants to play therapist to strangers." The brutal honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. My mother wasn't expressing momentary frustration or poor judgment. She was revealing core beliefs she had harbored for years. "Your grandmother left that money for education." I managed to say, my voice barely steady. "Your grandmother was a sentimental old woman who didn't understand practical priorities," Linda snapped. "Psychology isn't a real career. You'll waste 4 years studying feelings and emotions, then struggle to find decent employment. Jake has a future in construction management with real earning potential." Robert finally found his voice, though it carried none of his usual authority. "Linda, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," she said firmly. "Angelita needs to understand reality. We made the smart choice investing in the child who matters. Jake will build something meaningful with his life. He'll provide stability for our family legacy." Ashley looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat as she realized her luxury wedding had been funded through what amounted to theft from Jake's sister. "We plan to tell you after graduation." Linda continued, her tone suggesting this should somehow soften the betrayal. We expected you to understand our reasoning once you saw how successful Jake's marriage had become." The casual cruelty of her words left me speechless. My parents had not only stolen my inheritance, but expected gratitude for their decision. They viewed my hurt as unreasonable drama rather than justified anger at their deception. Jake finally spoke, his voice tight with growing understanding. "You lied to me too. You told me this money came from your personal savings." "We protected you from unnecessary guilt," Robert said quietly, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. "You deserve to enjoy your wedding day without worrying about financial details." "Financial details," I repeated incredulously. "You stole my inheritance and call it financial details." Linda's eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't be so dramatic, Angelita. You're perfectly capable of handling your own expenses. You've proven that by working multiple jobs and maintaining good grades. Jake needed our help more than you did." The conversation ended when I gathered my documents and left without another word. Behind me, I heard Ashley beginning to ask pointed questions about the true source of their wedding funding, while Jake sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the scope of our parents' favoritism. 2 days after the disastrous dinner, Jake texted asking to meet at Brewhouse Coffee, a quiet shop near the University of Cincinnati campus where we had occasionally studied together during high school. The familiar setting felt surreal given the circumstances that brought us there. He arrived looking haggard, his usual confident demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he had been sleeping poorly since learning the truth about his wedding funding. "I've been thinking about Sunday night non-stop." He began stirring sugar into his black coffee with unnecessary intensity. "I need you to know that I had absolutely no idea where the money came from." I studied his face, searching for signs of deception but finding only genuine distress. Jake had always been a terrible liar, unable to maintain eye contact when being dishonest. Today, his gaze remained steady and filled with regret. "When Ashley and I started planning the wedding, I specifically asked Mom and Dad if they could afford to help," he continued. "I was worried about them overspending on our celebration when they should be saving for retirement." He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a text conversation from 8 months earlier. The messages showed Jake expressing concern about wedding costs and their parents repeatedly assuring him they had been saving money specifically for this purpose for years. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a message from Linda dated last October. She wrote that they had been putting aside money since I graduated high school, planning for the day I would get married. She said it would be their joy to give me the wedding of my dreams using funds they had carefully accumulated. The text thread revealed a pattern of detailed lies our parents had constructed. Robert had sent Jake spreadsheets showing fictional savings account balances and projected wedding budgets. Linda had discussed their excitement about using money they had worked so hard to save for Jake's future happiness. "They showed me bank statements," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fake ones, I guess, or maybe they move money around temporarily to create the impression they had substantial savings." He scrolled further, revealing messages where Jake had repeatedly offered to scale back wedding plans if the costs were too high. Their parents had consistently refused, insisting they wanted to provide the best possible celebration for their son's marriage. "Here's the worst part," Jake said, showing me a thank you card he had written to our parents after the honeymoon. The handwritten note expressed deep gratitude for their incredible personal sacrifice and years of careful saving to give him a perfect wedding. He had specifically praised their generosity in using money they had worked so hard to accumulate for his happiness. Reading his sincere appreciation for their supposed sacrifice felt like a punch to the stomach. Our parents had not only stolen from me, but had manipulated Jake into feeling grateful for their theft. I wrote this card believing they had given up vacation plans and retirement dreams to fund my wedding. Jake said, his eyes filling with tears. I felt so loved and supported knowing they had prioritized my happiness for years. He revealed another devastating detail from their conversation with Ashley the night before their wedding. Our parents had pulled the couple aside to explain how meaningful it was to support Jake's marriage, using money they had saved through years of small sacrifices and careful budgeting. Dad told us he had worked overtime for 3 years to accumulate the wedding fund, Jake said. Mom cried, talking about how proud she was to see her years of saving finally used for such a joyful purpose. They made their generosity seem like the culmination of parental dedication and love. The manipulation ran even deeper than I had realized. Our parents had not simply stolen money and lied about its source. They had created an elaborate emotional narrative that made Jake feel cherished and prioritized, while simultaneously making me appear ungrateful and independent by choice. They told me you had decided not to use your college fund, Jake admitted reluctantly. They said you wanted to prove your independence by handling your own expenses and that you had specifically asked them not to interfere with your education funding. This final lie completed the picture of their deception. While stealing my inheritance, they had convinced Jake that I had voluntarily chosen to struggle financially. They had painted my absence of family support as personal preference rather than deliberate exclusion. Jake reached across the table and grabbed my hand, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Angelita, I swear on everything I hold dear that I would never have accepted that money if I had known the truth. If I had realized they were stealing from you, I would have stopped the wedding planning immediately." I believed him. Despite our parents' favoritism throughout our childhood, Jake had never been deliberately cruel or selfish toward me. He had been as thoroughly manipulated as I had been, just in a different direction. "What are we going to do?" He asked his question carrying the weight of our shattered family dynamic and his guilt over unknowingly benefiting from theft. For the first time since discovering the bank statements, I felt like I had an ally rather than facing this betrayal alone. The following Monday morning, I sat in the sterile office of First National Bank, waiting to meet with loan officer Patricia Williams about my financial situation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I clutched a folder containing my student loan documentation credit reports and the apartment application that had been denied 3 days earlier. Patricia, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, reviewed my paperwork with the thorough attention of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. Her expression grew increasingly concerned as she cross-referenced various documents. "Miss Martinez, I'm afraid your current debt-to-income ratio presents significant challenges," she began gently. "Your student loan obligations total $48,000 across multiple lenders, creating monthly payments that represent 67% of your projected income." The numbers felt abstract until she explained their real-world implications. My credit score had dropped to 543, placing me in the poor category that most landlords automatically rejected. The 3 part-time jobs that had sustained me through college appeared insufficient to convince creditors of my financial stability. "The apartment complex you applied to requires a minimum credit score of 650, Patricia continued. "Additionally, their policy mandates that monthly rent cannot exceed 30% of gross monthly income. Your current financial profile doesn't meet either requirement." I had been counting on that 2-bedroom apartment near the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, perfectly located for my graduate program in clinical psychology. The acceptance letter tucked in my purse suddenly felt worthless without housing to make attendance possible. Patricia pulled up additional information on her computer screen, her frown deepening as she discovered more complications. "I see you've also applied for several private student loans to cover graduate school expenses," she said. "Unfortunately, your current credit situation makes approval unlikely without a co-signer who meets strict financial requirements." The co-signer requirement felt like another slap from the universe. My parents clearly wouldn't help, and I had no other family members with sufficient income and credit scores to qualify. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been my only relative with financial stability, and she was gone. "There is something else you should understand," Patricia said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. If you had access to the $51,000 from your grandmother's educational trust, your financial picture would be dramatically different. She pulled out a calculator and began running hypothetical numbers. With that money paying off my undergraduate loans, I would have graduated debt-free with an excellent credit score above 750. The remaining funds would have covered graduate school tuition without requiring additional loans. You would have qualified for premium apartment rentals and received preferential treatment from landlords competing for financially stable tenants, Patricia explained. Instead, your current situation places you in a category that most property managers consider high risk. The cruel mathematics of my parents' betrayal became crystal clear. They hadn't just stolen money. They had destroyed my financial future and eliminated opportunities I had spent 4 years working toward. Patricia hesitated before sharing additional information that made my situation even more dire. Miss Martinez, there's something else you should know about your graduate program acceptance. I have a daughter who attended the same clinical psychology program 3 years ago. My heart sank as I anticipated more bad news. The program requires students to complete unpaid internships at local hospitals and mental health facilities. She continued, most students need flexible housing arrangements and reliable transportation to manage internship schedules that can include nights and weekends. Your current financial constraints would make meeting these requirements extremely challenging. She described how her daughter had struggled even with family financial support working part-time while completing demanding coursework and internship hours. Students without financial stability often dropped out during the second year, when internship demands made outside employment nearly impossible. The students who succeed typically have family support or substantial savings to cover living expenses during intensive training periods, Patricia said gently. Your current debt load would require maintaining multiple jobs, which conflicts with program requirements. I left the bank feeling completely defeated. The stolen inheritance hadn't just been money, it had been my pathway to a career in psychology and financial independence. Without it, I faced an impossible choice between declining my dream program or attempting graduate school with insurmountable financial obstacles. That evening, I called Dr. Sarah Martinez, my undergraduate psychology professor, who had written recommendation letters for my graduate applications. She had been my mentor and inspiration throughout college, and I desperately needed guidance about my options. Angelita, I'm so sorry to hear about your housing situation, Dr. Martinez said after I explained my predicament. Unfortunately, the clinical psychology program has very strict attendance and participation requirements that make it nearly impossible for students to maintain substantial outside employment. She confirmed Patricia's warnings about the program's demands and added details that made my situation feel hopeless. The second-year internship placements were highly competitive, and students who appeared financially unstable or overly stressed often received less desirable assignments that hurt their career prospects. I hate to ask this, but do you have any family who could provide temporary financial support? Dr. Martinez inquired carefully. The question hung in the air like a challenge I couldn't meet. My family had money, my money, but they had chosen to spend it on my brother's wedding rather than my education. The irony felt suffocating. As I hung up the phone, I realized my parents' theft had created consequences far beyond the immediate financial loss. They had stolen my timeline, my opportunities, and potentially my entire career path in psychology. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center to meet with Dr. Elena Martinez, the clinical psychology program director who would become my graduate advisor if I could somehow make attendance possible. Her office overlooked the sprawling medical complex, where I had dreamed of completing my internship rotations. Dr. Martinez, a distinguished woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair and warm brown eyes, had been my first choice for graduate mentorship based on her groundbreaking research in family trauma therapy. Her published studies on inheritance disputes and sibling favoritism had influenced my undergraduate thesis, making this meeting feel both hopeful and heartbreaking. I received your email about housing complications. She began settling into the chair across from her desk, rather than maintaining the formal barrier between us. I want you to know that we very much want you in our program, Angelita. Your application stood out among more than 300 candidates. She pulled out my admission file, pointing to highlighted sections of my personal statement and research proposal. My undergraduate work on family dynamics and financial manipulation had resonated strongly with the admissions committee, particularly given my first-hand experience with these issues. Your research proposal on inheritance-related family trauma is exactly the type of innovative work our program needs, Dr. Martinez continued. We specifically selected you because of your unique perspective on how financial manipulation affects family relationships and individual psychological development. The irony of her praise felt overwhelming. My personal statement had described overcoming family challenges that I thought were behind me, not realizing I was living through the exact trauma I hope to study and treat in others. However, I need to be completely honest about our program policies regarding deferrals and financial hardship. Dr. Martinez said, her tone shifting to convey serious concern. She explained that the clinical psychology doctoral program operated under strict guidelines from the American Psychological Association and the university's medical school partnership. Students who deferred admission automatically forfeited their funding packages, which in my case included a partial teaching assistantship worth $15,000 annually. The teaching assistantship you were awarded is highly competitive, she emphasized. We can only offer these positions to incoming students who commit to beginning the program immediately. If you defer, that funding becomes available to students on our waiting list. The financial implications grew worse as she continued explaining the program structure. The clinical track only accepted new students every 3 years due to limited partnerships with local hospitals and mental health facilities. Missing this opportunity meant reapplying in 3 years with no guarantee of acceptance or funding. The application pool grows more competitive each cycle, Dr. Martinez admitted reluctantly. 3 years from now, you would be competing against candidates with more recent research experience and potentially stronger letters of recommendation. Your current application strength might not translate to future success. She showed me statistics demonstrating how few students successfully gained admission after previous deferrals. The combination of increased competition and the perception that deferred students lacked commitment created significant barriers to future acceptance. There's another factor you should consider, Dr. Martinez added gently. Your undergraduate research on family trauma gave you a compelling personal narrative that strengthened your application. 3 years from now, admissions committees might view that experience as less immediate and relevant to your graduate work. The cruel timing of my parents' theft became even more apparent. They hadn't just stolen money. They had potentially destroyed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that had taken 4 years of dedicated work to achieve. Dr. Martinez leaned forward with genuine concern in her voice. I've been thinking about potential solutions since receiving your email. The university does maintain a small emergency housing fund for graduate students facing unexpected financial crises. She explained that the fund typically provided temporary assistance for students whose circumstances changed after admission, but before program commencement. However, the available support rarely exceeded $3,000 and was intended for short-term emergencies rather than ongoing financial instability. The emergency fund might cover your security deposit and first month's rent, she said, but it wouldn't address the underlying issue of your debt-to-income ratio or credit score problems that prevent standard apartment approval. She suggested exploring graduate dormitory options, though spaces for doctoral students were extremely limited and often assigned to international students who lacked local housing connections. The dormitories also maintained occupancy restrictions that would make maintaining part-time employment difficult. I'm willing to write letters supporting your applications for emergency assistance, Dr. Martinez offered. Your academic record and research potential justify exceptional consideration for any available resources. As our meeting continued, she shared more details about why the admissions committee had selected me specifically for this competitive program slot. My personal statement describing family challenges had convinced them I possessed the emotional resilience and personal insight necessary for effective clinical work. Your writing demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how family dynamics affect individual psychological development, she said, referencing specific passages from my application. The committee felt your lived experience would enhance your ability to connect with clients facing similar family trauma. The tragic irony wasn't lost on either of us. The family trauma I had described as motivation for studying psychology was continuing to unfold, potentially preventing me from pursuing the career path that trauma had inspired. "I need to ask directly," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "Is there any possibility your family situation could change? Could relatives who weren't initially supportive reconsider their position?" Her question forced me to confront the reality that my parents held the power to solve this crisis instantly by returning my stolen inheritance. They had the means to restore my educational fund and eliminate the financial barriers preventing my graduate school attendance. "The family members with financial resources are the ones who created this situation," I replied honestly. "They're unlikely to provide assistance voluntarily." Dr. Martinez nodded with the understanding of someone who had studied family dysfunction professionally for decades. Her expression suggested she recognized patterns of manipulation and favoritism that extended beyond simple financial disagreements. "Angelita, I want you to know that we'll hold your admission slot until the absolute last possible moment," she said firmly. "If you can resolve the housing issue by August 15th, you can still begin the program on schedule. We believe in your potential enough to maintain that flexibility." Her kindness and support made leaving her office even more difficult. For the first time in weeks, I had felt hope about my future, only to have reality crash back down as I drove home past apartment complexes I couldn't afford. That evening, I sat in the University of Cincinnati Law Library surrounded by legal textbooks and feeling completely out of my depth. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across inheritance law statutes that might as well have been written in a foreign language. I had scheduled an appointment with the student legal clinic for the following morning, but my anxiety demanded immediate action. The law library's quiet atmosphere seemed conducive to research, even though I barely understood the legal terminology I was encountering. Marcus Thompson, a third-year law student working part-time at the circulation desk, noticed my obvious frustration with the towering stack of legal books surrounding my table. "You look like someone wrestling with a problem that might benefit from actual legal training," he said, with a friendly smile gesturing to the chaotic spread of statutes and case law I had been unsuccessfully trying to navigate. I explained my situation in basic terms, carefully avoiding names and specific details, while describing inheritance theft and educational trust fund misuse. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his growing interest in the legal complexities involved. "What you're describing sounds like potential breach of fiduciary duty," he said, pulling several relevant textbooks from my pile and opening them to specific chapters. "Educational trusts create legal obligations for trustees that extend beyond simple financial management." He guided me through the relevant Ohio statutes governing inheritance law and educational trust administration. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but Marcus translated the key concepts into understandable terms. Ohio Revised Code, Section 2109.23, specifically addresses misuse of educational trust funds, he explained, pointing to highlighted passages in the statute book. When trustees use designated educational funds for purposes outside the trust's scope, they're legally required to restore the full amount plus interest. The revelation that legal remedies might exist for my situation felt like the first ray of hope I had experienced since discovering my parents' theft. Marcus continued researching, finding additional statutes that strengthened my potential case. "Here's something interesting," he said, showing me a section about inheritance fraud. "Ohio law treats misuse of educational trusts as a form of theft when trustees knowingly violate the grantor's stated intentions." He explained that my grandmother's will would be the crucial document determining whether legal action was viable. If her testament contained specific language designating the funds exclusively for my education, my parents' actions could constitute criminal behavior rather than simple financial disagreement. You need to obtain a copy of your grandmother's complete will, Marcus advised. The language she used to establish the educational trust will determine the strength of your legal position. He provided contact information for the law school's clinic and suggested I schedule an immediate consultation with supervising attorneys who specialized in inheritance disputes. Marcus also recommended contacting the law firm that had handled my grandmother's estate to request copies of all relevant documents. There's one more thing you should consider. He added, his expression becoming more serious. If you decide to pursue legal action, you need to understand that family relationships rarely survive inheritance lawsuits. Even if you win financially, you might lose your family permanently. His warning carried the weight of someone who had witnessed family destruction through legal battles. I thanked Marcus for his help and gathered my research materials, feeling both empowered by newfound knowledge and terrified by the implications of using it. The following morning, I called Henderson Williams and Associates, the law firm that had handled my grandmother Eleanor's estate. The receptionist connected me with Jonathan Williams, the attorney who had overseen the will reading 3 years earlier. "Miss Martinez, of course I remember your grandmother's estate," Mr. Williams said warmly. "Eleanor was a remarkable woman who was very specific about her intentions regarding your educational fund." He scheduled an immediate appointment to review the complete will and discuss my legal options. His willingness to meet quickly suggested he understood the urgency of my situation. "I should mention that your grandmother included some unusual provisions in her will that might be relevant to your current circumstances," Mr. Williams said mysteriously before ending our call. "I think you'll find our conversation quite illuminating." Tuesday afternoon found me sitting in Mr. Williams' downtown Cincinnati office, a space filled with dark wood furniture and law books that commanded respect and conveyed decades of legal experience. Mr. Williams, a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, spread my grandmother's complete will across his mahogany desk. "Your grandmother was an exceptionally thoughtful woman who anticipated potential complications with her educational bequest." He began pointing to specific clauses in the document. She included language that most testators never consider necessary. He showed me sections of the will I had never seen before. My grandmother had not simply left money for my education. She had created a comprehensive legal framework designed to protect my inheritance from exactly the type of manipulation my parents had employed. Eleanor specifically wrote that the educational trust funds must be used solely for Angelita's higher education expenses, including tuition books, housing, and other costs directly related to academic pursuits. Mr. Williams read aloud. She further specified that any misuse of these funds constitutes breach of fiduciary duty, requiring immediate restitution of the full amount plus 6% annual interest. The legal language was clear and unambiguous. My grandmother had anticipated the possibility of my parents redirecting my inheritance and had constructed legal protections to prevent exactly that scenario. "There's more," Mr. Williams continued, turning to additional pages. "Eleanor included a provision that if the educational funds were ever misused, you would be entitled to triple damages plus reasonable attorney fees. She was determined to make theft of your inheritance financially devastating for anyone who attempted it." The revelation that my grandmother had foreseen my parents' betrayal and legally protected against it felt both validating and heartbreaking. Eleanor had understood her daughter Linda's favoritism toward Jake and had tried to shield me from its consequences even after her death. Mr. Williams explained that the legal protections Eleanor had included made my case exceptionally strong. Any competent attorney would take the case on contingency, meaning I wouldn't need to pay legal fees unless we recovered the stolen funds. "Your parents violated multiple fiduciary duties and potentially committed inheritance fraud," he said definitively. "The evidence is clear, and your grandmother's will provides ironclad legal standing for recovery. However, he also echoed Marcus's warning about family relationships. Pursuing legal action would likely destroy any possibility of reconciliation with my parents and might create lasting divisions within extended family networks. I need to ask whether you're emotionally prepared for that level of family destruction, Mr. Williams said gently. Legal victory might come at the cost of permanent family relationships. As I left his office with copies of my grandmother's will and a clear understanding of my legal rights, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. I had the power to recover my inheritance and save my graduate school opportunity, but using that power would likely end my relationship with my parents forever. 3 days later, Jake called me at 11:30 at night, his voice tight with panic and desperation. Background noise suggested he was calling from his car rather than his apartment, and I could hear the stress in his rapid breathing. Angelita. I need to talk to someone who will understand what's happening, he began without preamble. My marriage is falling apart, and I think it's connected to everything that came out at Sunday dinner. I was studying for final exams in my apartment surrounded by psychology textbooks and research papers, but Jake's distress demanded immediate attention. He had never called me late at night before, and his voice carried a level of anxiety I had rarely heard from my typically confident brother. Ashley has been acting completely different since she learned the truth about our wedding funding, Jake continued. She's making financial decisions based on assumptions about our family's wealth that aren't true. He described how Ashley had been spending money since their honeymoon as if they had access to ongoing family financial support. She had purchased a luxury car lease that required monthly payments of $647, far exceeding their budget based on Jake's construction management salary. She bought a BMW sedan because she said wives from wealthy families shouldn't drive economy cars. Jake explained his frustration evident. When I tried to discuss the payment amount, she said our parents would obviously help with expensive necessities. The situation had escalated beyond automotive purchases. Ashley had spent $4,000 on furniture for their 2-bedroom apartment, selecting pieces from high-end retailers and expecting Jake's parents to contribute to major household expenses. She's planning home renovations that would cost $15,000, Jake said, his voice breaking with stress. Crown molding, granite countertops, hardwood floors. She keeps saying successful families invest in their children's homes, and our parents will want us to have a beautiful place for entertaining. I could hear the financial pressure building in Jake's voice as he described Ashley's expectations. She had grown up in a middle-class family where parents occasionally helped with major expenses, but she now believed Jake's family possessed substantial wealth based on their wedding generosity. The worst part is that she's already booked our first anniversary trip to Europe, Jake continued. 12 days in Italy and France, staying in luxury hotels that cost $300 per night. She said our parents would be insulted if we didn't celebrate our first anniversary properly. He'd been afraid to tell Ashley they couldn't afford her lifestyle choices because she had married him, believing his family was financially stable and generous. The elaborate wedding had created expectations about ongoing support that Jake knew he couldn't meet. I've been losing sleep for weeks trying to figure out how to pay for everything she's committed us to, Jake admitted. I've been researching second jobs and overtime opportunities, but the numbers don't add up. We need help, and I was hoping our parents might provide additional support. The crushing irony of his request hit me like a physical blow. Jake needed money from our parents to maintain the lifestyle they had created through stealing my inheritance. He was asking them to solve financial problems they had caused by using funds that belonged to me. I was actually planning to ask Mom and Dad for a loan this weekend. Jake continued, unaware of how his words affected me. Maybe $15,000 or $20,000 to help us get established and cover Ashley's expectations. I thought they would understand that the wedding was just the beginning of supporting our marriage. I felt simultaneously angry and sympathetic. Jake was facing financial pressure created entirely by our parents' deception, but his solution involved asking for more money that would likely come from other questionable sources. "Jake, do you understand that Mom and Dad don't actually have the kind of money Ashley thinks they do?" I asked carefully. There was a long pause before he responded, and I could hear him processing the implications of my question. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. I explained that our parents' income from Robert's insurance job and Linda's retail work couldn't support the level of financial generosity Ashley expected. Their ability to fund his elaborate wedding had come from my stolen inheritance, not from accumulated savings or ongoing wealth. "Are you saying they don't have money to help us with current expenses?" Jake asked, his voice reflecting growing realization about his precarious situation. "I'm saying they spent my $51,000 on your wedding, and they probably don't have substantial savings to solve your current problems," I replied honestly. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. When Jake finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone whose worldview was crumbling. "Oh God, Angelita, Ashley is going to lose her mind when she realizes we can't afford the lifestyle she thinks we're entitled to. She's already told her friends and family about the expensive anniversary trip and home renovation plans." He described how Ashley had been bragging to her sisters about marrying into a generous family that prioritized their children's happiness and financial security. She had specifically mentioned Jake's parents' willingness to fund major life events and ongoing support for their marriage. "Her entire perception of our relationship is based on financial security I can't actually provide," Jake said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to tell her that the wedding was probably the only major financial help we'll ever receive, and even that came from questionable sources." As our conversation continued, Jake revealed the depth of pressure he was facing. Ashley had already made deposits for the European anniversary trip and had scheduled contractors to begin home renovations the following month. The financial commitments she had made totaled nearly $25,000. "I'm trapped between disappointing my wife and asking our parents for money that might not exist," Jake said finally. "And now I'm realizing that asking for more money would be asking them to steal from someone else or go into debt they can't afford." For the first time, Jake seemed to understand that our parents' favoritism toward him had created problems rather than providing genuine advantages. The theft of my inheritance hadn't just hurt me. It had created unsustainable expectations that were now threatening his marriage. "What am I supposed to do, Angelita?" he asked, his voice carrying desperation I had never heard before. I realized that my parents' theft had created victims beyond just me. Jake's marriage was suffering because of financial expectations created through their deception, and he faced the impossible task of explaining to Ashley that his family's apparent wealth was actually based on theft and manipulation. The following Saturday, Jake asked if I could help him organize wedding gifts and thank you cards at his apartment. Ashley had been overwhelmed by the task of writing personal notes to 67 wedding guests, and the unopened gifts were taking over their living room. I agreed to help partly out of genuine desire to support my brother during his financial crisis, and partly because I wanted to understand more about the elaborate celebration my inheritance had funded. Jake's downtown apartment reflected Ashley's expensive taste with furniture and decorations that clearly exceeded their budget. Ashley went to visit her sister in Louisville for the weekend, Jake explained as I surveyed the chaos of wedding gifts covering every surface of their living room. She needed space to think about our financial situation after I finally told her the truth about our parents' limited resources. Unopened presents sat alongside stacks of thank you cards, gift registry printouts, and 3 different wedding photo albums. The sheer volume of gifts suggested the level of celebration my stolen inheritance had funded, and seeing the evidence of luxury I had unknowingly provided felt deeply unsettling. "I've been putting off writing thank you notes because I felt guilty knowing the wedding was funded through stolen money," Jake admitted as we began sorting gifts by sender. "How do you thank people for celebrating something that was based on theft?" We worked in relative silence for the first hour organizing presents and creating lists of guests who required thank you notes. Jake's guilt was evident in his careful handling of each expensive gift, and I could see him calculating the cost of the celebration with new understanding of its true source. "Ashley wants to create a wedding video montage for our first anniversary," Jake said, pulling out his laptop and connecting it to the living room television. "She asked me to review all the footage and select the best moments before she returns from Louisville." He opened video files from their wedding photographer, and images of the elaborate celebration filled the screen. The riverside venue looked stunning with professional lighting, highlighting expensive floral arrangements and elegant table settings that had clearly cost thousands of dollars. "I haven't been able to watch these videos since learning about the money's source," Jake said quietly. "Seeing all that luxury knowing it came from your inheritance makes me sick to my stomach." We fast-forwarded through ceremony footage, cocktail hour scenes, and dinner service that showcased the premium catering I had unknowingly funded. Every frame reminded us of the stolen money that had created these beautiful memories. "Wait, stop there," I said, noticing our parents approaching the microphone during dinner speeches. "I want to see what Mom and Dad said during the reception." Jake hesitated before playing the footage. "Are you sure you want to watch this? It might be painful to see them taking credit for everything." I insisted, and he reluctantly played the video segment. Our father Robert stepped up to the microphone, looking proudly at the assembled guests while Linda beamed beside him. "Good evening, everyone." Robert began, his voice carrying across the restaurant with confidence and authority. "Linda and I want to thank you for celebrating this special day with Jake and Ashley." The camera panned across guests who were clearly enjoying the expensive reception wine glasses raised as they listened to our father's speech. "We're honored to support our son as he begins this new chapter," Robert continued. "Investing in Jake's future has been one of our greatest joys as parents because we know he's made smart choices and will build something meaningful with his life." My stomach clenched as I heard the words, "investing in Jake's future," and realized our father was taking credit for generosity funded by theft. Linda stepped forward to add her own comments, and her words proved even more devastating. "We're proud to support the child who will actually contribute to society," Linda said, her voice carrying clearly through the reception venue. "Jake has always made responsible decisions and deserves our investment in his happiness. Unlike some children who waste time on useless degrees, Jake will build a real career and give us grandchildren to carry on our family legacy." The camera captured guests nodding approvingly at Linda's words, and I could see several of our cousins exchanging glances that suggested they understood the implicit criticism of my choices. "We believe in supporting children who make us proud." Linda continued, raising her champagne glass toward Jake and Ashley. "Tonight represents our commitment to the family member who matters most." The assembled relatives applauded enthusiastically, completely unaware they were celebrating theft and family betrayal, disguised as parental generosity. Several guests approached our parents after the speech to praise their wisdom and generosity in supporting Jake's marriage. Jake paused the video, his face pale as he processed what we had just witnessed. "I had no idea they said those things about you," he whispered, his voice filled with horror. "I was too focused on Ashley and didn't pay attention to their specific words during the speeches." The video continued with reception guests congratulating our parents on their generous support and wise parenting decisions. Uncle David specifically praised their smart investment in Jake's future, while Aunt Patricia commented on how refreshing it was to see parents who understood which children deserved support. "They didn't just steal your money," Jake said, his realization growing as we watched more footage. "They used the theft to publicly humiliate you in front of our entire extended family." We discovered additional devastating footage from the cocktail hour, where Linda had been speaking with Ashley's parents about the importance of supporting children who made responsible life choices. The conversation included specific references to my psychology degree as an example of impractical education that wouldn't lead to meaningful employment. "Your daughter is lucky to have parents who understand the difference between real careers and expensive hobbies," Ashley's mother had replied, clearly influenced by Linda's characterization of my education. The wedding video revealed that our parents had used my stolen inheritance not just to fund Jake's celebration, but to create a public narrative that portrayed me as irresponsible and undeserving, while positioning themselves as wise parents who invested in the right child. As we finished watching the reception footage, Jake looked completely devastated. "Angelita, I am so incredibly sorry," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I had no idea they were using our wedding as an opportunity to destroy your reputation with the family. This is so much worse than I realized." Monday morning found me sitting in the law office of Henderson Williams and Associates, where Mr. Williams had scheduled an emergency meeting after my phone call describing the wedding video discovery. His secretary had moved other appointments to accommodate my urgent need to discuss new developments in my case. "Miss Martinez, I'm glad you called immediately after discovering that footage," Mr. Williams said as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "The public disparagement of your character adds another dimension to your legal options that we need to discuss." He had prepared additional documents since our previous meeting, suggesting he had been researching precedents for my case. A thick folder labeled Eleanor Martinez Estate, Supplemental Materials, sat prominently on his desk. "Before we discuss your recent discoveries, I need to share something your grandmother left in my care," Mr. Williams said, retrieving a sealed envelope from his office safe. "Eleanor specifically instructed me to give this to you only if complications arose regarding your educational fund." The envelope, addressed in my grandmother's familiar handwriting to "My dearest Angelita," felt heavy with significance. Eleanor's cursive script included a notation, to be opened only if my educational bequest encounters family interference. Your grandmother was an exceptionally perceptive woman who understood family dynamics that others preferred to ignore, Mr. Williams explained as I carefully opened the sealed letter. She anticipated potential problems and took steps to protect your interests that went far beyond standard estate planning. The letter, written in Eleanor's careful handwriting on her personal stationery, began with words that brought tears to my eyes. "My precious granddaughter, if you are reading this letter, then my worst fears about your parents' character have been confirmed. I hoped I was wrong, but I prepared for the possibility that Linda and Robert would betray your trust in pursuit of their favoritism toward Jake." Eleanor's letter continued with devastating insights into family dynamics I thought had been hidden from her observation. "I have watched your mother treat you differently than your brother since you were small children. Linda's disappointment in having a daughter became more obvious as you grew older and developed interests she didn't understand or value. I tried to compensate for her lack of support, but I worried about what would happen after my death." The letter revealed that Eleanor had specifically modified her will multiple times to protect my inheritance from exactly the type of manipulation my parents had employed. She'd consulted with Mr. Williams extensively about legal language that would prevent misuse of educational funds. "I included specific provisions in my will that require complete restitution if your educational money is used for any other purpose," Eleanor wrote. "I also arranged for additional protections that your parents don't know about." Mr. Williams watched as I read, occasionally pointing to relevant sections of Eleanor's letter that corresponded with legal documents he had prepared. "Here's the most important part," he said, directing my attention to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Eleanor's letter revealed that she had secretly recorded conversations with my parents during the will reading process 3 years earlier. She'd been suspicious of their promises to safeguard my inheritance and had used a small recording device to capture their verbal commitments. "I recorded Linda and Robert promising to use your fund exclusively for education," Eleanor wrote. "They specifically assured me that Jake would receive separate wedding support from their own savings and that your inheritance was sacred for your educational purposes only." Mr. Williams produced a small digital recorder from his desk drawer, along with transcripts of the recorded conversations. Eleanor had documented multiple instances where my parents explicitly promised to protect my educational fund and expressed understanding of their fiduciary responsibilities. "Listen to this section," Mr. Williams said, playing a portion of the recording where Linda's voice was clearly audible. "Eleanor, please don't worry about Angelita's fund," Linda's voice said through the speaker. "We understand completely that this money is specifically for her education. We would never dream of using it for any other purpose. Jake will receive wedding support from our own savings when the time comes." Robert's voice followed equally clear in his commitment. "That educational money is sacred, Eleanor. We promise you that Angelita's inheritance will only be used for her college and graduate school expenses. You have our word as her parents." The recordings continued with additional promises and assurances that made my parents' theft even more egregious. They had looked my dying grandmother in the eyes and sworn to protect my inheritance while apparently already planning to steal it for Jake's wedding. "Your grandmother was thorough in protecting your interests," Mr. Williams continued. "She also arranged for a private investigator to monitor the educational fund after her death." He showed me reports from a private investigation firm documenting my parents' financial activities over the past 3 years. The investigator had tracked the fund balance, noted the transfer to the catering company, and identified the wedding expenses funded by my inheritance. "Eleanor arranged to pay for ongoing monitoring because she suspected your parents might violate their promises," Mr. Williams explained. "The investigators' reports provide detailed evidence of exactly how your stolen money was spent." Eleanor's letter concluded with instructions that brought both comfort and empowerment. "If you are reading this letter, you have been betrayed by people who should have protected you. I am giving you the tools to fight back and reclaim what is rightfully yours. Don't let anyone convince you that family loyalty requires accepting theft and manipulation. Stand up for yourself with the strength I know you possess." The letter also revealed that Eleanor had established an additional trust fund that I could access at age 25, currently containing nearly $30,000 that my parents knew nothing about. She'd anticipated that they might attempt financial manipulation and had created backup resources to ensure my long-term security. "Miss Martinez, your grandmother's preparation makes your case absolutely bulletproof," Mr. Williams said confidently. "Between the recorded promises, the investigator's evidence, and the specific legal language in her will, your parents have no defense against charges of inheritance fraud and breach of fiduciary duty." As I left Mr. Williams' office with copies of Eleanor's letter and the recorded evidence, I felt empowered for the first time since discovering my parents' betrayal. My grandmother had reached beyond death to protect me from exactly the type of favoritism and manipulation that had shaped my childhood. Eleanor had seen clearly what I had tried to ignore. My parents' love was conditional and unequal, and she had taken extraordinary steps to shield me from the consequences of their prejudice. Tuesday morning, I returned to Mr. Williams' office with a clear determination that had been absent during our previous meetings. The weight of Eleanor's letter and the recorded evidence had transformed my perspective from victim to someone prepared to fight for justice. "I want to pursue full legal action against my parents," I announced as I settled into the familiar leather chair. "I'm ready to file charges for inheritance fraud and demand complete restitution plus damages." Mr. Williams nodded approvingly, having prepared additional documentation since our previous meeting. His desk contained organized folders labeled Evidence, Precedent Cases, and Settlement Demands, suggesting he had been building a comprehensive case strategy. "Before we proceed, I need to share additional evidence your grandmother arranged that makes your case even stronger," he said, retrieving another sealed envelope from his office safe. This envelope contained audio recordings Eleanor had made, using more sophisticated equipment than I had previously realized. She had recorded multiple conversations with my parents over several months, capturing their promises and commitments regarding my educational fund. "Your grandmother was methodical in documenting every interaction," Mr. Williams explained as he set up professional audio equipment. These recordings include conversations from the initial will reading, follow-up meetings, and casual family gatherings where your parents discuss their intentions. The first recording featured my parents meeting with Eleanor 2 months before her death, discussing final details of her estate planning. Linda's voice came through clearly as she assured Eleanor of their commitment to my education. "We completely understand that Angelita's fund is exclusively for her college and graduate school expenses," Linda said emphatically. "Robert and I have been saving separately for Jake's wedding since he was in high school. We would never consider mixing those funds or using Angelita's inheritance for anything other than education." Robert's voice followed with equal conviction. "Eleanor, you can rest peacefully, knowing that Angelita's educational fund will be protected. We've already discussed with Jake that his wedding expenses will come from our personal savings. That's our responsibility as his parents, just like protecting Angelita's inheritance is our responsibility to her." The recording continued with Eleanor specifically asking about their financial planning for both children. My parents provided detailed explanations of their separate savings accounts and their commitment to treating both children fairly while respecting the specific purposes of Eleanor's bequests. "We've been putting aside money for Jake's wedding for 8 years, Linda explained in the recording. "We started saving $50 monthly when he turned 16, and we've increased that amount as Robert's salary grew. We have nearly $15,000 specifically designated for his wedding expenses." The lie was comprehensive and deliberate. My parents had created an entire fictional narrative about wedding savings while secretly planning to steal my inheritance. Eleanor had been systematic in recording these conversations because she sensed deception beneath their promises. Mr. Williams played additional recordings from family gatherings where my parents discussed their commitment to educational equality. At Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, Robert had specifically told Eleanor that both children would receive equal educational support and that Jake's eventual wedding would be funded through separate parental savings. "These recordings demonstrate premeditation," Mr. Williams explained. "Your parents didn't simply make a poor decision in a moment of financial pressure. They systematically lied to Eleanor while planning to violate their fiduciary duties." He showed me legal precedents for inheritance fraud cases involving educational trusts. Ohio courts had consistently ruled that trustees who misused designated educational funds were required to pay triple damages plus interest and attorney fees. The most relevant case involved a father who used his daughter's educational trust to pay for his son's medical school tuition. Mr. Williams said, referencing a court decision from 2 years earlier, "The judge ruled that favoritism-based misuse of trust funds constituted both breach of fiduciary duty and theft by deception." The legal precedent was encouraging, but Mr. Williams wanted to ensure I understood the full scope of evidence supporting my case. He produced bank records obtained through the private investigator Eleanor had hired, documenting every transaction involving my educational fund over the past 3 years. The investigator tracked your fund balance monthly and identified exactly when and where the money was transferred. He explained, showing me detailed financial reports. "We can prove that your parents transferred the funds directly to wedding vendors just weeks before Jake's ceremony." The investigative reports included photographs of my parents meeting with wedding planners, receipts from luxury vendors, and evidence of the Mediterranean cruise booking that had consumed $12,000 of my inheritance. Eleanor's foresight in arranging professional documentation made proving theft straightforward. Your grandmother also arranged for character witness statements. Mr. Williams continued producing letters from Eleanor's friends and former co-workers who could testify about her specific intentions regarding your educational fund. 3 of Eleanor's closest friends had provided notarized statements describing conversations where Eleanor expressed concern about Linda's favoritism toward Jake and her determination to protect my educational opportunities. The statements demonstrated Eleanor's clear intentions and her awareness of potential family manipulation. These witnesses can testify that Eleanor specifically worried about your parents' trustworthiness and took extraordinary precautions to protect your inheritance, Mr. Williams explained. Their testimony will counter any arguments that Eleanor intended flexible use of the educational funds. He outlined the legal strategy we would pursue, beginning with a formal demand for restitution that would give my parents one final opportunity to resolve the matter without public court proceedings. If they refused, we would file civil charges for inheritance fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of trust property. Based on Ohio law and the strength of our evidence, you're entitled to the return of $51,437 plus 6% annual interest, Mr. Williams calculated. Additionally, your grandmother's will specifies triple damages for willful misuse of educational funds, bringing your total claim to approximately $180,000. The financial calculation was staggering. My parents' theft would cost them far more than the original stolen amount due to Eleanor's protective legal language and Ohio's strong inheritance fraud penalties. There's one more element we should discuss. Mr. Williams said, his expression becoming more serious. The wedding video evidence you discovered creates an additional claim for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He explained that my parents' public disparagement of my character and education during the wedding reception, funded by my stolen inheritance, created grounds for additional damages. Using my money to publicly humiliate me while taking credit for generosity constituted particularly egregious behavior that courts took seriously. We can argue that your parents not only stole your inheritance, but used the theft to damage your reputation with extended family members, Mr. Williams said. The combination of financial theft and public humiliation creates a compelling case for maximum damages. As our meeting concluded, Mr. Williams prepared a formal demand letter that would give my parents 72 hours to restore my educational fund completely or face public legal proceedings. The letter outlined the evidence against them and specified the exact amount of restitution required to avoid civil and potentially criminal charges. Miss Martinez, your grandmother's preparation has given you an unwinnable legal position, Mr. Williams said confidently. Your parents cannot successfully defend against this level of documented evidence. The only question is whether they'll restore your inheritance voluntarily or force us to pursue court-ordered judgment. I left his office carrying copies of Eleanor's recordings, the investigative reports, and the formal demand letter that would soon shatter my parents' comfortable denial about the consequences of their betrayal. Wednesday afternoon, I reserved Conference Room B at the Cincinnati Public Library's downtown branch, a neutral location that would prevent my parents from controlling the narrative through familiar surroundings. The room's professional atmosphere seemed appropriate for delivering what amounted to a business ultimatum regarding their theft and fraud. I arrived 30 minutes early to organize my evidence, spreading copies of bank statements, Eleanor's recordings transcript, and legal documents across the conference table. The visual impact of comprehensive documentation would reinforce the seriousness of their legal exposure. My parents arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, their expressions shifting from curious concern to obvious anxiety as they observed the formal meeting setup. Linda's defensive posture was immediately apparent, while Robert's insurance adjuster training led him to assess the legal documents with growing apprehension. "Angelita, what exactly is the purpose of this meeting?" Linda asked sharply, settling into the chair across from me, without making eye contact with the evidence spread across the table. "The purpose is to give you 72 hours to restore my inheritance completely, or face public legal proceedings for inheritance fraud and breach of fiduciary duty," I replied, calmly sliding copies of Mr. Williams' formal demand letter across the table. Robert picked up the legal document immediately, his face growing pale as he read the detailed accusations and evidence summary. Linda initially ignored the paperwork, maintaining her defensive posture, until Robert's expression alarmed her enough to examine the letter herself. "This is ridiculous," Linda said after scanning the first page. "You can't threaten legal action over family financial decisions. We're your parents, and we made choices we believed were in the family's best interests." I activated the small digital recorder Mr. Williams had provided and played the first segment of Eleanor's recordings. Linda's own voice filled the conference room, promising Eleanor that my educational fund was sacred and would never be used for any other purpose. The color drained from both parents' faces as they heard their recorded commitments and explicit promises to protect my inheritance. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he recognized the legal implications of documented fraud. "Where did you get those recordings?" Linda demanded, her voice rising with panic. "Grandmother Eleanor recorded every conversation because she suspected you might betray your promises," I replied steadily. "She also hired a private investigator to monitor my educational fund after her death. I showed them the investigative reports documenting their financial activities, including photographs of their meetings with wedding vendors and detailed records of how my stolen money had been spent. The evidence was comprehensive and undeniable. Eleanor left specific instructions that if you violated your fiduciary duties, I should pursue maximum legal remedies." I continued reading portions of her letter aloud. She anticipated exactly this type of favoritism-based theft and created legal protections to ensure justice. Robert finally found his voice, though it carried none of his usual authority. "Angelita, surely we can discuss this as a family, without involving lawyers and legal threats." "You had 3 years to discuss this as a family," I replied firmly. "Instead, you chose to lie, steal, and publicly humiliate me using my own inheritance money. The time for family discussions ended when you violated grandmother's trust and your legal obligations." I played additional recordings where Linda specifically explained their separate savings for Jake's wedding, demonstrating the premeditated nature of their deception. Their own voices provided undeniable evidence of systematic lies and planned betrayal. Linda's defensive anger transformed into desperation as she grasped the strength of the evidence against them. "You're threatening to destroy your own family over money. Is that really what Eleanor would have wanted?" "Eleanor specifically wanted me to fight back against theft and manipulation," I replied, reading directly from her letter. She wrote that family loyalty doesn't require accepting betrayal and that I should stand up for myself with strength. I outlined their legal exposure, explaining that Ohio law required triple damages for willful misuse of educational trust funds. Their $51,000 theft would cost them approximately $180,000 in court-ordered restitution, plus attorney fees. "You have 2 choices," I said, sliding Mr. Williams' business card across the table. "Restore the complete educational fund within 72 hours or face public legal proceedings that will bankrupt you and destroy your reputation." Robert studied the legal documents with growing understanding of their hopeless position. "Angelita, we don't have $51,000 available immediately. The wedding expenses depleted our savings, and we don't have liquid assets to restore the fund quickly." "That's not my problem," I replied without sympathy. "You chose to steal my inheritance for Jake's luxury wedding. Finding restitution money is your responsibility, not mine." Linda made one final attempt at manipulation. "Think about what this will do to Jake's marriage and our family relationships. Ashley will be devastated if she learns their wedding was funded through stolen money. You should have considered those consequences before committing inheritance fraud," I answered calmly. "Jake and Ashley are already facing financial problems because you created unsustainable expectations through theft." I explained that I had already prepared a comprehensive letter detailing their betrayal, ready to send to their church congregation neighborhood association and extended family members. I had also scheduled meetings with Jake's in-laws to reveal the truth about their wedding funding source. "Everyone who praised your generosity at the wedding reception will learn that your support was based on theft from your own daughter," I said, maintaining steady eye contact with both parents. "The public humiliation you caused me will be returned with interest." Linda began crying, but her tears appeared motivated by self-pity rather than genuine remorse. Robert remained focused on the legal documents, clearly calculating their financial exposure and recognizing the strength of evidence against them. "72 hours," I repeated, standing to leave the conference room. "Contact Mr. Williams to arrange restitution or face the full consequences of your betrayal." I gathered my evidence and walked away without another word, leaving my parents alone with the undeniable proof of their theft and the knowledge that their comfortable denial was ending permanently. Thursday evening, Jake called me in complete panic, his voice breaking with stress and confusion as he tried to explain a devastating conversation with our parents. "Angelita, Mom and Dad just called demanding that Ashley and I immediately return $25,000 for some kind of family emergency," Jake said, speaking rapidly as if the words were painful to hold inside. When I asked for details about the emergency, they admitted they need money to repay your education fund. I could hear background noise suggesting Jake was pacing frantically around his apartment. Ashley's voice carried from another room, asking pointed questions that Jake was clearly struggling to answer. "I told them we don't have $25,000 lying around, and that's when Mom completely lost control," Jake continued. "She started screaming that the wedding money was a loan, not a gift, and we were ungrateful for not helping them when they needed family support." The desperation in our parents' demand revealed how little they understood about Jake and Ashley's actual financial situation. They had created the illusion of wealth through my stolen inheritance, but Jake's construction management salary couldn't support returning substantial amounts of money. "Dad tried to explain that they're facing legal action from you, but Ashley overheard the entire conversation," Jake said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She's absolutely furious that our wedding was funded by stolen money from your inheritance." I could hear Ashley's voice rising in the background, though her specific words were unclear. Jake's responses suggested she was demanding explanations he couldn't provide about his family's deception and manipulation. "Ashley is threatening divorce," Jake admitted, his voice breaking completely. "She says I lied about our family's wealth and that she married me under false pretenses. She feels humiliated that her dream wedding was actually based on theft from my sister." The conversation continued, with Jake describing Ashley's growing realization that their entire lifestyle since the wedding had been built on fictional expectations. She had bragged to friends and family about marrying into a generous, supportive family, only to discover that the generosity was stolen money. "She's packing clothes and talking about staying with her sister in Louisville until she decides whether to continue our marriage," Jake said through tears. "She says she can't trust me if I come from a family that steals from each other." I felt simultaneously vindicated and sympathetic. Ashley's anger was completely justified, but Jake was suffering consequences for deception he hadn't participated in creating. "What did you tell Mom and Dad about the money they're demanding?" I asked. "I told them we don't have it," Jake replied. "The wedding expenses they paid for created debt we're still managing, not wealth we can access. Ashley's spending since the honeymoon has been based on credit cards and loans, not cash." He described their current financial situation, which was far more precarious than our parents had realized. Ashley's luxury car lease, expensive furniture purchases, and planned European anniversary trip had stretched their budget beyond sustainability even before this crisis. I explained that demanding money from us would require us to take high-interest loans or default on existing obligations. Jake continued. "Mom said family emergencies required sacrifice and that we were being selfish." The irony was overwhelming. Our parents had stolen my inheritance to fund Jake's wedding, creating financial expectations that were now threatening his marriage, and they expected him to solve their legal problems through additional financial sacrifice. "Did you tell them about Ashley's reaction and the threat to your marriage?" I asked. I tried to explain how devastating this has been for Ashley, but Mom dismissed her feelings as dramatic overreaction, Jake said bitterly. "She said young wives needed to learn that family loyalty sometimes required uncomfortable truths." Linda's response demonstrated her complete inability to understand the consequences of her actions. She had created a crisis that was destroying Jake's marriage, while simultaneously demanding that he solve the legal problems resulting from her theft. Dad was slightly more understanding, but he kept saying they had no choice but to ask for our help. Jake continued. He admitted they don't have savings to restore your fund and were hoping we could provide at least partial restitution. Robert's admission revealed the depth of their financial irresponsibility. They had not only stolen my inheritance, but had apparently spent beyond their means on Jake's wedding, without maintaining resources to address potential consequences. Jake, I need you to understand something important, I said carefully. Our parents' legal problems are entirely self-created. You don't owe them money to fix consequences of their theft. There was a long silence before Jake responded, and I could hear him processing the implications of choosing between family loyalty and marriage preservation. I know you're right, he said finally, but watching Mom cry and hearing Dad talk about potential bankruptcy is really difficult. They made terrible choices, but they're still our parents. I explained that our parents' emotional manipulation was designed to make Jake feel responsible for solving problems he didn't create. Their tears and panic were consequences of their own actions, not his obligation to resolve. Ashley is right to be angry, I continued. Your marriage was built on lies our parents created, and now you're both suffering consequences of their deception. Don't let them destroy your relationship through additional manipulation. As our conversation ended, Jake faced an impossible choice between supporting his lying parents and preserving his marriage to a woman who felt betrayed by his family's theft and manipulation. The crisis was expanding beyond my stolen inheritance to threaten the very relationships our parents had claimed to be protecting through their favoritism. Friday morning brought an unexpected phone call from my father, his voice carrying a mixture of defeat and desperation I had never heard before. Robert had always maintained controlled professional composure, even during family disagreements, making his obvious emotional distress particularly striking. Angelita, your mother and I have secured the money to restore your educational fund, he began without preamble. We want to present it to you properly during a graduation celebration dinner we've planned for tomorrow evening. I was immediately suspicious of both the sudden availability of funds and their desire for a public presentation. My parents had shown no inclination toward genuine apology or private restitution during our library conference room confrontation. Where did you find $51,000 in 48 hours? I asked directly. We borrowed against my retirement fund, and your mother sold her jewelry collection, Robert replied, his voice reflecting the financial sacrifice these actions represented. It wasn't easy, but we understand the urgency of resolving this situation. The explanation seemed plausible but didn't address their motivation for public presentation rather than simple private restitution. I suspected they were planning another manipulation designed to control the narrative surrounding their theft. We've invited extended family members to witness our gift to you, Robert continued, confirming my concerns about their intentions. Uncle David, Aunt Patricia, your cousins, and several other relatives want to celebrate your graduation and our support of your education. The word gift revealed their strategy. My parents intended to portray the return of my stolen inheritance as generous parental support rather than court-ordered restitution for theft. They were planning to rewrite history publicly while family members witnessed their supposed generosity. 15 relatives have already confirmed attendance for tomorrow evening, Robert said, his voice gaining confidence as he described their planned manipulation. We've reserved the back room at Panzini's restaurant, and your mother has prepared a special speech about how proud we are of your independence and academic achievements. I realized they had crafted an elaborate narrative designed to make themselves appear as supportive parents who had always planned to provide educational funding. The timing of their gift presentation would coincide with graduation celebration, suggesting long-term planning rather than emergency theft recovery. We want the family to understand how much we've always believed in your education, Robert continued. This celebration will demonstrate our commitment to both our children's success. Their manipulation was sophisticated and dangerous. By presenting the restitution as a planned gift during graduation festivities, they would create a public narrative that absolved them of theft while positioning me as ungrateful if I revealed the truth about their betrayal. "Linda has been working on her speech for days," Robert said, pride creeping into his voice. "She wants to express how much we've learned about the value of supporting our daughter's dreams and how grateful we are for your patience while we arranged this educational surprise." The reference to patience was particularly galling as it suggested I had been aware of their planned support, rather than discovering their theft through accidental evidence. They were attempting to reframe my anger as impatience, rather than justified response to betrayal. "We know the timing seems sudden," Robert admitted, "but we wanted your graduation celebration to include this special moment of family support. Several relatives specifically asked to witness our presentation to you." I suspected they had already shared their fictional narrative with extended family members, portraying themselves as parents who had been secretly saving for my education while allowing me to develop independence through temporary struggle. "What exactly did you tell relatives about this dinner and your planned presentation?" I asked. Robert's hesitation before responding confirmed my suspicions about advanced narrative manipulation. "We explained that we had been planning an educational gift for your graduation, but wanted to wait until you had proven your commitment to academic excellence," he said carefully. "Family members are excited to celebrate both your achievement and our support of your future." They had poisoned the well by establishing expectations that would make revealing the truth appear vindictive and ungrateful. Relatives who believed they were witnessing generous parental support would react negatively if I exposed the theft underlying their supposed gift. "We hope you'll accept this celebration in the spirit it's intended," Robert continued. "Your mother has been looking forward to publicly expressing her pride in your accomplishments." The manipulation was complete. My parents had arranged circumstances that would force me to either accept their false narrative or appear vindictive by revealing theft during what appeared to be a generous graduation celebration. I agreed to attend the dinner while privately planning to expose the complete truth about their betrayal, their theft, and their current manipulation. If they wanted a public presentation, they would receive public accountability. "I'll be there," I said, simply giving no indication of my intentions for the evening. After ending the call, I contacted Mr. Williams to inform him of my parents' restitution plan and their attempt to control public narrative. He assured me that accepting returned funds wouldn't compromise future legal action if they failed to provide complete restoration or continued their defamation. Saturday evening would determine whether my parents were capable of genuine accountability or if they would persist in manipulation even while returning stolen money. Saturday evening at Panzini's restaurant felt like walking into a carefully orchestrated performance designed to rewrite history through collective witness. The back dining room had been decorated with graduation banners and family photos, creating an atmosphere of celebration that masked the true nature of the occasion. 15 relatives filled the room, their faces bright with anticipation for what they believed would be a heartwarming demonstration of parental support. Uncle David, Aunt Patricia, cousins Sarah and Michael, and several other family members I rarely saw had gathered to witness what they understood to be my parents' generous graduation gift. Linda wore her best dress and jewelry, having clearly spent considerable effort appearing as a proud, generous mother. Robert carried a cashier's check in an elegant envelope, preparing for his moment of apparent magnanimity. Both parents beamed with satisfaction as relatives praised their wisdom in supporting my education. "We're so proud of Angelita's achievements," Linda told Aunt Patricia as I entered the room. "Supporting her education has been one of our greatest joys as parents." The casual lies flowed effortlessly, supported by relatives who had no reason to suspect the truth about my stolen inheritance. Uncle David specifically commended my parents' patient approach to educational funding, praising their wisdom in allowing me to develop independence before providing support. Dinner proceeded with normal family conversation, graduation congratulations, and anticipation for the special presentation my parents had promised. Several cousins shared their own educational experiences and expressed gratitude for family support they had received during college years. "Your parents have been so excited about tonight," Cousin Sarah said warmly. "They've been planning this celebration for months and kept saying how proud they are of your academic success." The fictional narrative had been thoroughly established among family members who genuinely believed they were witnessing loving parents supporting their daughter's educational achievements. My parents had created perfect conditions for public manipulation. As dinner plates were cleared, Robert stood and raised his wine glass to command attention from the assembled relatives. "Everyone, Linda and I want to thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate Angelita's graduation and our pride in her academic accomplishments." Robert began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. He presented the cashier's check with theatrical flourish, announcing their long-planned educational gift, while relatives applauded approvingly. Linda dabbed tears from her eyes, portraying maternal emotion over her daughter's success. "We've always believed in Angelita's potential," Linda said as she prepared to deliver her rehearsed speech. "Supporting her education represents our commitment to both our children's futures." The moment for truth had arrived. I stood slowly accepting the check while maintaining eye contact with both parents. "Thank you for this $51,437. I said, clearly ensuring every relative heard the specific amount. "I want to share with everyone the remarkable story of how this money became available for my education." Linda's confident expression faltered as she realized I was departing from their expected script. Robert's face went pale, recognizing that their manipulation was about to be exposed. "This money originally came from my grandmother Eleanor's educational trust fund, which she established specifically for my college and graduate school expenses." I continued, my voice steady and clear. 3 years ago, Mom and Dad promised Eleanor they would protect this inheritance and use it only for my education. The room fell silent as relatives began processing information that contradicted everything my parents had told them about tonight's celebration. I activated my phone speaker and played segments of Eleanor's recordings, where Linda and Robert explicitly promised to safeguard my educational fund, while funding Jake's wedding through separate savings. "We would never dream of using Angelita's inheritance for any other purpose." Linda's recorded voice filled the restaurant. "That educational money is sacred, Eleanor." Uncle David demanded to see the bank statements I had brought, while Aunt Patricia stared at my parents with growing understanding of their deception. The evidence was comprehensive and undeniable. 6 months ago, Mom and Dad transferred this entire inheritance to pay for Jake's luxury wedding expenses. I explained, showing receipts for the riverside venue, gourmet catering, and Mediterranean honeymoon. While I worked 3 jobs to afford tuition, they spent my inheritance on prime rib dinners and open bar service. Cousin Michael asked pointed questions about the timeline and specific amounts while relatives examined the bank transfer records. The documentation painted a clear picture of systematic theft and long-term deception. At Jake's wedding reception, using my stolen inheritance money, Mom made a speech about supporting the child who matters and described my psychology degree as worthless compared to Jake's practical career. I continued referencing the wedding video evidence. The assembled family members sat in stunned silence as they realized they had been repeating my parents' lies about family priorities and educational choices. Several relatives approached me privately to apologize for comments they had made based on Linda's false narratives. Jake arrived during the middle of my presentation, having been called by concerned relatives. He publicly confirmed every detail of my account and apologized for unknowingly benefiting from theft. "I had no idea the wedding money came from Angelita's inheritance," Jake said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "Our parents lied to both of us about the funding source." Linda attempted several interruptions, but family members demanded to hear the complete truth. Robert remained silent throughout the presentation, apparently recognizing that denial was impossible given the overwhelming evidence. Uncle David stood up and addressed my parents directly. "Linda, Robert, what you've done is theft, plain and simple. Using Eleanor's educational trust for Jake's wedding violated every promise you made to a dying woman. Aunt Patricia added her own condemnation. We've been telling other relatives that Angelita was ungrateful for not accepting family help. Now we learn she was being robbed by her own parents while we criticized her independence. The evening ended with extended family members expressing support for my position and disappointment in my parents' betrayal. Several relatives mentioned they would need to correct false impressions they had shared with other family members about my character and choices. As the gathering dispersed, my parents sat alone at their decorated table, finally confronting the social consequences of their theft and manipulation without the protective shield of family ignorance. 6 months later, I sit in my graduate school apartment near the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, reflecting on how dramatically my life has changed since that confrontational graduation dinner. The morning sunlight streams through windows of the comfortable 2-bedroom space I can finally afford, made possible by the restored educational fund and the newfound financial stability it provided. My clinical psychology program has exceeded every expectation I held during those desperate weeks when housing problems threatened to derail my academic dreams. Dr. Elena Martinez selected me for a prestigious internship specializing in family trauma therapy, recognizing that my personal experience with inheritance manipulation and sibling favoritism provides unique insights for helping other families navigate similar betrayals. The irony isn't lost on me that my parents' theft ultimately enhanced my qualifications for the exact career path I had chosen before discovering their betrayal. My research proposal on inheritance-related family trauma, originally written from theoretical understanding, now carries the weight of lived experience that professors and fellow students find compelling and authentic. Jake divorced Ashley 3 months ago, a painful but necessary decision that freed him from the financial expectations created by our parents' deception. Ashley's demands for a lifestyle based on fictional family wealth had become unsustainable, and Jake chose honesty about our family's limitations over continuing a marriage built on lies. To his credit, Jake moved to Cincinnati to be closer to my graduate school, where we've rebuilt our relationship on foundations of truth and mutual support. He started therapy to process his guilt about unknowingly benefiting from theft, and has become my strongest advocate within our extended family network. I never realized how much our parents' favoritism affected you until I saw the evidence of their theft. Jake told me during our weekly coffee meeting last week. I'm grateful you had the courage to fight back instead of accepting their manipulation. Jake's growth and accountability have surprised our entire family. He publicly apologized to relatives for the wedding deception, even though he was as much a victim of our parents' lies as I was. His willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths has earned respect from family members who initially blamed him for the inheritance crisis. Our parents faced consequences that extended far beyond financial restitution. Linda and Robert lost credibility with their church congregation after the truth about the inheritance theft became widely known. Several major family events excluded them, forcing confrontation with social costs of their favoritism and manipulation. Linda eventually wrote me a lengthy apology letter, acknowledging her mistakes and requesting forgiveness. Unlike her previous manipulative communications, this letter demonstrated genuine understanding of how her favoritism toward Jake had damaged our relationship and violated Eleanor's trust. I realize now that my disappointment in having a daughter instead of 2 sons led me to treat you unfairly from childhood, Linda wrote. Your grandmother saw what I was too stubborn to admit, that my favoritism was hurting you and would eventually destroy our family relationships. The letter continued with specific acknowledgments of her behavior patterns and commitments to changed attitudes. Most importantly, Linda admitted that my psychology career choice was valuable and meaningful, contradicting years of dismissive comments about my educational goals. Robert's apology was shorter, but equally sincere, focusing on his failure to protect me from Linda's favoritism and his cowardice in allowing theft rather than confronting his wife's prejudiced decisions. Our relationship remains strained, but has begun the slow process of rebuilding based on their demonstrated behavior changes rather than empty promises. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or trusting immediately, but it can create space for people to prove genuine transformation. The restored inheritance plus legal interest provided more than enough funding for graduate school tuition, housing, and living expenses without requiring student loans. The financial freedom has allowed me to focus entirely on my studies and research without the exhaustion of multiple part-time jobs. More significantly, the additional $30,000 from Eleanor's secret trust fund, which I accessed at 25, has been invested for future educational expenses if I choose to pursue doctoral studies beyond my master's degree. Eleanor's foresight continues protecting my academic future even years after her death. My research on inheritance manipulation and family favoritism has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Family Psychology, turning my personal trauma into professional expertise that will help other families facing similar dynamics. The academic recognition validates my grandmother's belief in my potential and my choice to study psychology despite family criticism. The therapeutic work I'm conducting with families experiencing inheritance disputes has taught me that favoritism and financial manipulation are more common than most people realize. My ability to understand these dynamics from personal experience has enhanced my effectiveness as a counselor and researcher. Most importantly, I've discovered that standing up for myself didn't just restore my financial security, but taught me invaluable lessons about boundary setting and self-advocacy that benefit every aspect of my life. The strength I found to confront my parents' theft has carried over into professional relationships, academic challenges, and personal growth. Dr. Martinez recently offered me a research assistant position for next year that includes tuition remission and a substantial stipend. The opportunity represents recognition of my academic potential and personal resilience that makes my undergraduate struggles feel worthwhile. Your combination of lived experience and academic rigor makes you uniquely qualified for this research, Dr. Martinez explained. Students who understand family trauma personally often become the most effective therapists for helping others heal from similar experiences. Looking back, I recognize that Eleanor's protective planning extended beyond financial resources to include life lessons about fighting for what's right. Her recordings, letters, and legal preparations taught me that accepting unfair treatment to maintain peace actually enables further abuse and manipulation. The graduation ceremony that began this story represented an ending and a beginning. It marked the conclusion of my undergraduate education, but also the start of my journey toward becoming someone who refuses to accept injustice, even from family members who should have protected me. Today I work with families where parents manipulate inheritance, siblings compete for favoritism, and financial resources become weapons in emotional warfare. Each client benefits from my understanding that healing requires acknowledging truth, demanding accountability, and building relationships based on respect rather than obligation. My story has taught me that true family loyalty means supporting each other's dreams and treating everyone fairly, not protecting those who manipulate trust for personal benefit. Sometimes the most loving action toward family members is refusing to enable their harmful behavior. Eleanor would be proud to see her educational investment producing exactly the type of professional and personal growth she envisioned. Her granddaughter has learned to fight for justice, while maintaining her humanity to seek truth, while offering forgiveness, and to build a career helping others navigate the complex relationships between love, money, and family loyalty. The strength to confront betrayal and demand fairness has become the foundation for a life of purpose, professional success, and personal integrity that no one can steal or manipulate. That lesson, perhaps, was the most valuable part of my inheritance. I want to ask you, have you ever experienced favoritism or financial manipulation within your own family? How did you handle the situation, and what advice would you give to someone facing similar betrayal? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real family stories and share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding that standing up for yourself is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to value yourself enough to demand the respect and fairness you deserve.